So the point is, before we start, can we just kind of predict what this story would be about? It's called The Lottery. Any idea? So we'll start first with Mustafa, then Ahil, then Samiha, then Hubair. Okay, so first,
Miss,
Mustafa.
I think this story will be about a person who must have opted for lottery and he must have won it, and about what he did with the lottery or something.
Okay, cool. Cool. Someone must have won a lottery and got a lot of money and so on. All right, Ahil, what about you?
Miss,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, Miss. I was saying that I'm interested to read it.
Yes, but what do you think it's about?
Miss, I think it's about
Like some guess.
I think someone who won like a really big lottery and how he's gonna spend his life with it, like how.
Okay, that's
what
pretty
he's
much
gonna do.
similar to what Mustafa said. What about you, Samiha?
Yeah, I think it's about a lottery. Like maybe someone wins a lottery, maybe someone loses a lottery. Like it's basically surrounded.
Okay. And Hubeb, any ideas? I think everyone's saying the same ideas. Can we maybe try
Yes,
for...
it depends on the plot, but it could be like a person who won a lottery by some sort of accident, maybe. By accident, he won a lottery, and maybe now he's planning to use it without telling anyone.
Okay, if you win the lottery, the question here is, and I think Samiha picked up
Maybe he
on
got
this.
that lottery, he found that lottery ticket, and that happens to be the correct ticket, and he wins the lottery.
Well, that's how
And
one way to win a lottery. Now, so that's a
like
way
an
to...
evil theme. It could be an evil theme.
Okay, now that's interesting because Samiha picked up on it and Hubeb picked up on it. The thing is that are all lotteries, or to have won a lottery, is that always a good thing? If you've read the Hunger Games, in that also there's this like kind of lottery picking and they pick out the name, but the person who they pick out has to fight in the Hunger Games to their death. Only one person can survive. So the lottery could be good, lottery could be bad, and
that depends on what the lottery is about.
Samiha, my laptop is not gonna crash. I have way more tabs than this on my other, like on the other tabs, which you maybe can see,
Yes,
maybe
but
can't
why? Why can't you just turn them off?
because they're all my little works. If I close them, I forget about them. Okay, let's start. Abis, nice to have you.
Miss, the good or bad or about what is good or bad about the lottery depends on what the lottery is for. Means what is the price? Means like who would want to fight for that and enter a lottery for that?
See, the only thing is, you were very correct. The only thing is, if we think about a lottery, and if I were given a title, the lottery, many students, especially young students, would say, oh, it's about winning a lottery and how life is going to be spent with $1 million. That's a very typical and obvious response. Now that we're growing up, now that we're looking at literature, you need to expect that things are going to be different than what they seem, and you need to be able to branch your mind in different ways. Your first thought could be, yes, it's like, wow, the lottery and amazing stuff, but you should also be mature enough, reflective enough, and deep enough to come up with a more complex idea for the lottery. So that's what I actually want, a little bit of complexity of thinking. I'm not saying that you're right or you're wrong, but we need to be able to come up with better answers when we brainstorm. So let's start with the lottery. Yes, Mustafa?
I think that it will be about two friends who participate in a lottery, and one of them wins the lottery while the other one doesn't, and the other one will go against the friend, and this will be about how they try to plot against each other.
Okay, like the lottery becomes the undoing of their friendship. That's interesting. That's interesting. Abes, I'll just ask you, we're looking at this story today. Can you please tell me, if you have the title, The Lottery, what ideas can come in your mind? What could be the possible potential plot lines in this? And then we'll start.
Won the lottery and someone else wants to steal it.
Someone else wants to steal it. Okay, good. So we have some dark themes and then we have some brighter themes. We have looked at them in like equal detail. The only thing that I feel like you maybe didn't mention now is exactly what they got, like what was the lottery. But I think there was an underlying assumption in all your answers that it was some sort of money. But winning a lottery doesn't have to only be money. So that's also something that you have to be able to think about, right? We have to come up with more mature, more complex, more like original and challenging ideas. We can't be thinking like, you know, grade 3-year-olds. We have to branch out. The minute someone gives you one word, your mind should like move in different ways. So let's start with this. The morning of June 27th, clear, sunny, fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, like all over the place in a lot, and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank around 10 o'clock in the morning. In some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 2nd. So I don't understand. Why would it start on June 2nd? I guess they mean June 25th. Okay, June 25th. I don't understand. Okay, but in this village where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours. So it could begin at 10 in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. So in 2 hours, we can wrap it up. So this seems to be a lottery that takes place in different villages. And there seems to be a distinctive or a specific lottery for each village. Very interesting. And it's such a beautiful day for such a momentous occasion. It's almost like nothing could go wrong. It's such a beautiful day. Unity, brotherhood, brethren, fraternity, everyone coming together on this wonderful, peaceful, rich, and fertile morning. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty, meaning freedom, sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play. And their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Okay, so although they have been let loose of school, the school is still on their minds because it's too close to their summer vacation. It's too close to the time that school was on. So kind of the liberty, the freedom that they now actually have is sitting on them not so comfortably because of the fact that they just haven't registered it yet, or they still feel like they're part of school and the school memories have not really faded. And that's why they're talking about the classroom, the teacher, the books, and all the scoldings and reprimands that they've gotten. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pocket full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. So we have Bobby Martin, we have Bobby and Harry Jones, we have Dickie Delacroix. The villagers pronounced this name Delacroix. Eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. So now these boys are just collecting their stones and like guarding them, protecting them so that nobody else can take their stones. That's how the children are behaving. The girls stood aside talking among themselves. Of course, girls and boys have slightly different demeanor and personalities and actions. So they're talking amongst themselves and they're looking over their shoulders at rolled in the dust or clung at rope. I think there's something wrong with this PDF, to be honest, but okay. The girls stood aside talking among themselves, looking over their shoulders at rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. Okay, so the girls are kind of a little bit more wary meaning cautious. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting, of rain, of tractors, of taxes. So a whole other demographic, a whole other class of people have now entered, and that is our men. Yes, Shirley Jackson is a very, 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 very famous author. Okay, soon and she specifically is very famous for this book, for this short story. Okay, soon the men began to gather. And in fact, this was the first of its kind of short story. And then after this, lots of short stories have kind of developed a similar plot line to this one. So this was very like different, and nobody had ever read something like this. Okay, so the men began to gather. They're looking at their children. They're speaking of planting. They're speaking of rain, tractors, taxes, business, all of that. They stood together away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. So they're not really that free or that openly discussing things. They're kind of staying a little subdued, a little bit composed. The women, they were wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, and they came shortly after their husbands or their brothers. They came after the menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women standing by their husbands began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called many times, 4 or 5 times, right? Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing, back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his older brother. So now what's happening is they're all, although they are coming separately, the thing is that they are now congregating into their respective families. The children are not too happy about going back to their parents because, of course, they want to play, but the fathers are making sure that the children are there. The lottery was conducted. Okay, so the lottery takes place. There were also square dances. There was a teen club. There was a Halloween program by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to these kind of civic activities. Civic activities meaning activities to do with the society, like this only, cleaning up the yard, cleaning up the beach, hosting a garden flower show. He was a round-faced, jovial, like happy-going man, and he ran the coal business. And people were sorry for him because he had no children, and his wife was a scold. His wife was just really annoying. She was really annoying. And she used to gossip a lot. That's pretty much what it means, scold. When he arrived in the square carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "Little late today, folks." The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box upon the stool. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool. And when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand?" there was hesitation before finally 2 men, Mr. Martin and his older son Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside them. So they're like kind of, okay, I'm just going to close this WhatsApp because it's distracting me. Okay. So, that was that. Okay, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers is like kind of now randomizing the papers, making sure that the papers are all different. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been long lost long ago. Paraphernalia means the items associated with that thing. Like the paraphernalia for going out in the rain would be taking your umbrella, wearing a raincoat, Wellington boots, rain jacket, maybe goggles, maybe some gloves, rubber proof, what are those, rubber gloves. That's the paraphernalia. So paraphernalia for the lottery, meaning the lottery, the way it was conducted the first time round, or the time, initially it was being conducted, that the box for it and the items and the paper, maybe the paper on which you had to write, or maybe the shaker which shakes it, that they didn't have. But the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before old man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. But this one also, this black box has its own history, has its own legacy. In fact, it is also quite old, although it's not the original, when the first time the lottery was held. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. Okay, I feel like there's something wrong with this PDF, but I just had to take it out right now since we're not doing Animal Farm today. But anyway, we'll just get through the little grammatical errors. So the issue here is everyone wants to keep the same box, although it's not the original. It is as close to the original and as close to that historical legacy, that tradition as possible. There was a story that this present box, this box, had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, meaning from the original box. So little bits of that history of that original box were within this box. The one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. So no black box new is happening. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now, it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. In a way, the black box is showing a lot of wear and tear. And you want to think about this, a black box could very possibly be symbolic, could be a symbol in a story, especially when there's so many lines devoted to this black box. Now, can someone try and tell me what might this black box symbolize? And especially this point that the black box is getting really, really worn out and fading and splintering and kharab and not good. Like, what could that possibly imply? Can someone make a guess? Again, we want to think like kind of deeper.
That it's very old.
Deeper. What do you mean? What do you mean?
Means it has been used for lottery several times.
Ahil?
Miss, I think that whenever like there's a black box in a story or in a movie, usually it means something bad is gonna happen. Possibly. Or like something different.
Yeah, you know, black, the color black is a color symbolic for doom, gloom, some sort of foreboding, ominous, sinister feeling. And the funny thing is, the blackness is like getting overpowered by the box and the original wood, which is almost like the box itself cannot hold anymore, or the black box can no longer even contain its blackness. Then it's too overwhelming for the box itself. I mean, that could be an interesting interpretation, but let's see. So Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Vino Baxter, have gone to try and help solve this. I hear your voice. Mute. Okay. So the black box, Mr. Martin and the son have gone to help Mr. Summers. So they held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the paper, thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery. So basically what's happening back in the day, when the first time this lottery was being held, they didn't use strips of paper. In the same way as they didn't use this particular black box, they didn't use strips of paper to write names. They used chips of wood. But Mr. Summers, who seems to be very interested in change, Mr. Summers seems to be like interested in novelty, in newness, in modernity. He wants that the chips of wood are changed for slips of paper, and they are changed to slips of paper because obviously now you cannot fit so many chips of wood into the box. That's what he's saying. But it seems like he's very happy with this also. Okay, the night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper, put them in the box, and it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square next morning. The rest of the year, the box was put away, sometimes one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves' barn. Really interesting names. We have Mr. Grave, and then we have Mr. Summer. Like Mr. Summer and Mr. Grave. And Grave, like a grave of a person. It has spent 1 year in Mr. Graves' barn and another year underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was set on a shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. There's just too much history going on about this black box. I mean, we have 8 pages. 2 of them is just devoted to the black box. There is significance to this black box. There's significance to this.
But I think something unusual is going to happen about the black box.
Possibly. But lots of times you can't expect fantasy to take place in these stories. Maybe magic is not going to happen because this is like adult literature. In adult literature, a little bit more mature and more classic literature, you don't have fantasy happening too much. There are very few fantasy books that are famous for that are classics, and they're more geared towards younger students, like Alice of Wonderland and The Child in It, or whatever, something like that. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. But either way, there is something very morbid, something very sinister. I would just say the word sinister because that's coming in my mind about this whole situation, about Mr. Summers, the way he's so much the custodian of this black box, the way Mr. Grave and him are like, just keeping it in such a precious way, making sure it's safe. It has so much of entitlement upon these villagers, and the villagers are so scared of going towards it, and yet they're there, and it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day with a black shabby box in the middle of the town. Okay, there was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. So there were lots of people that we needed to write, okay, the names of. We need to write the names of fathers, children, every single member of each family. There was a proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered there had been a recital of some sort performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Some people believe that the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he said or sang it. Others believe that he was supposed to walk among the people. But years and years ago, this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. There had been also a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box. But this also had changed with time until now it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. Mr. Summers was very good at all this. In his clean white shirt and blue jeans, with one hand resting carelessly on the black box, he seemed very proper and important as he talked interminably to Mr. Graves and the Martins. Okay, so I want to just go through this paragraph, what happens. Finally, after a lot of fuss of the black box, lots of ritualistic symbolism, putting it in the middle, asking people, making it very inconvenient for people, making them have to work for the black box to be in the middle of the town. Then finally, the lottery is open and everyone's supposed to come in and put in their name, write their name in. Right. So, but before that, there was a swearing in, like an oath taking of, before the lottery is put in and decided, read out. And it has also a legacy. It has a custom. It has a tradition. Those traditions have changed a lot. But some people remember those traditions. Some people remember them in a certain way. Some people remember them in a certain way. So the aura of mystery overall is remaining quite a lot. So what were some of the things that were happening or could have happened in the past in the original version of the lottery? So like, for example, they said that there was a recital of some sort. Maybe they were saying, oh God, let this be a holy day for the lottery of our town. Maybe that sort of thing, performed by the official of the lottery. A perfunctory, tuneless chant. Perfunctory means like just something that doesn't hold too much of value or meaning. It's done just without thinking too much. Okay, but some people believe that actually he didn't really sing the song like that, the chant or his oath like that. He used to in fact do it like just so. He used to stand just so, just like this. When they say that he used to stand just so, it means like just like this. And when he used to sing it, he used to stand just like this. And others believe no, that he was actually supposed to say it while walking amongst the people. But anyway, this ritual has lapsed. It's gone. They're not following it. There was also the salute, but they're not following that also, right? And in fact, now only the official, meaning Mr. Summers, is going to speak when someone's going to come to him. And Mr. Summers is very good. He's very competent. He's very professional, especially in his clean white shirt and him being careless and him talking a lot to not just Mr. Grace, but to the Martin family also. Okay. Just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking and turned to the assembled villagers, so finally his talking is done, Mrs. Hutchison came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders and slid into place in the back of the crowd. So Mrs. Hutchison has come a little late and she gets at the back of the crowd and she says, I clean forgot what day it was. Very similar to what Samiha said today. She said to Mrs. Delcroix, who stood next to her, and they both laughed softly. Thought my old man was out back stacking wood, Mrs. Hutchison went on. And then I looked out the window and the kids were gone. And then I remembered it was the 27th. And then I came running. She dried her hands on her apron and Mrs. Delcroix said, you're in time. They're still talking away. So you're just on time. So funnily enough, no one's really reminding anyone that it's the day of the lottery. It's almost like everyone is like zombies or like robots being magnetically assembling towards the center of the square of the village without anyone telling. Like, you remember how first the children came and they're also, then the fathers came, then the mothers came. And then finally, Mrs. Hutchison is saying that her husband didn't tell her anything. And then she saw in the window. It's very strange. Everyone's doing their own thing. Okay, so she's in time. Lucky for her, she's in time. Mrs. Hutchison craned her neck to see through the crowd, found her husband and children standing near the front. She tapped Mrs. Delcroix on the arm as a farewell and began to make her way in front. The people separated good-humoredly to let her through, like, oh, okay, go. 2 or 3 people said in voices just loud enough to be heard across the crowd, here comes your Mrs. Hutchison, here comes your wife. And Bill, she made it after all. Mrs. Hutchison reached, so like very light, there's this very light-heartedness and yet the strangeness, right? So Mrs. Hutchison reached her husband and Mr. Summers, who had been waiting, said cheerfully, thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie. Mrs. Hutchison said, grinning, wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe? So basically, she's teasing her husband, he's teasing her, that, oh, I thought you wouldn't make it today. And she's like, oh, yeah, I know. You didn't tell me because you didn't want me to leave the bartan in the sink. A soft laughter ran through the entire crowd because everyone's like, oh, so funny, husband and wife, little jokes. Okay. And the people have gone back into their original position as soon as Mrs. Hutchison, like, the kind of Red Sea opening that they had done, that's gone back. Well, now, Mr. Summers said soberly, guess we better get started, get this over with so we can go back to work. Anybody ain't here? Is anybody not here? Dunbar. Mr. Summers consulted his list. Clyde Dunbar. Yeah, he broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him? Me, I guess. Like, who is going to pick his one out? Me, I guess, said a woman. And Mr. Summers turned to look at her wife draws for her husband. Mr. Summers says, don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie? Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions in a formal way. Although he knows the answers, he's still going to ask formally as if he doesn't know because he's a good officiant and he's going to do it. Mr. Summers waited with an expression of polite interest while Mrs. Dunbar answered, Horace is not but 16 yet, she said regretfully. Guess I got to fill in for this old man this year. Right. And then he made a note very professionally, although he already knew that point, right? Okay. So Clyde Dunbar is not here because of his leg, and his wife is Janie is going to do it for him, except that like they want, and we're not really sure what this lottery is looking like. Like, what do you mean by draw it? Someone else is drawing for you? Like, we are not understanding the rules. And that's really ironic. That's really interesting that we're not understanding the rules. Why? Because for the last 3 pages, they were just talking about the box and the rules and the lottery. And yet we don't know anything about the lottery. Like, everything that was, all the information was given was pretty irrelevant to the actual crux of the matter or the actual essence of the lottery and how it runs and what is its purpose and what's the prize and all of that, right? So anyway, so he's being very pro, like in fact over efficient, as you know, you would say, that writing the notes that, yeah, okay, he's not here. Then he asked, Watson boy drawing this year? A tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. Here, I'm drawing for my mother and me. He blinked his eyes nervously and ducked his head as several voices in the crowd said things like, good fellow lack, and glad to see your mother's got a man to do it. Okay, so probably his mother also has some issue. So he's doing it for his mother and for his own self. Well, guess that's everybody. Old man Warner make it? Here, I'm here, old man Warner said. A sudden hush fell on the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat, looked at the list. Already, he called. Now, I'll read the names, heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had it done. Everything clear? Everyone's going to pick up a name. The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, Adams. So probably like in alphabetical order or so. A man disengaged himself from the crowd. He came forward. Hi, Steve, Mr. Summers said. And Mr. Adams said, hi, Joe. They grinned at one another humorously. There's no actual happiness or mirth. And nervously, then Mr. Adams reached into the black box, took out a folded paper. He held it firmly by one corner as he turned and went very quickly back to his place in the crowd where he stood a little apart from his family, making sure not to look down at his hand, which has the paper. Allen, Anderson, Bentham, seems like there's no time at all between lotteries anymore, Mrs. Delacroix said to Mrs. Graves in the back row. Seems like we got through with the last one last week only. Time sure goes fast. So the lottery has happened many, many times. Okay, let's see. Clark, Delacroix. There goes my man, my old man, Mrs. Delacroix said. She held her breath while her husband went forward to pick out a name. Dunbar, and Mrs. Dunbar went steadily to the box while one of the women said, go on. Women said, go on, Janie. And another said, there she goes, there she goes. We're next, Mrs. Graves said. She watched while Mr. Graves came around from the side of the box, greeted Mr. Summers very gravely. Mr. Graves did so gravely and selected a slip of paper from the box. By now, all through the crowd, there were men holding small folded papers in their large hands, turning them over and over nervously. Mrs. Dunbar and her two sons stood together, Mrs. Dunbar holding the slip of paper. Harbert, Hutchison, get up there, Bill, Mrs. Hutchison said, and the people near her laughed. Jones, okay, so Mr. Hutchison probably has gone and gotten his paper and then moved to J. They do say, Mr. Adams said to old man Warner, who stood next to him, that over in the North Village, they're talking of giving up the lottery. Okay, so now there seems to be interesting news. That in one of the towns, they're saying that they're not going to do the lottery anymore. So let's see. Old man Warner, he snorted. Crazy fools they are. Why are you listening to the young folks? Nothing's good enough for those young folks. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to living in caves. Nobody's work anymore. Live that way for a while. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'd all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery, he added petulantly. Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking with everybody. Okay, so old man Warner's is just saying it's these youth and their new age ideas, which is just really stupid ideas that they have. They're inane ideas, like inane meaning dumb, and insane ideas. These ideas should not be followed. And you know what? If we just start following the youth and their ideas, then they'll put us back on to living in caves, and we'll be eating stewed chickweed and acorns the rest of our life. And don't they know that lottery in June, corn be heavy soon? Don't they know this saying that when we do this lottery, that's how we get our harvest? That's how, all the good stuff happens to us. And he's really annoyed with even Joe Summers. He's like, you know what, this little orangutan that we have, this Joe Summers, he's just a clown. He's just this young clown of ours. I mean, bad enough that he's the officiant of this entire thing, but okay, some places have already, quit the lotteries, Mrs. Adams said. Nothing but trouble in that, he said stoutly. Pack of young fools that they are. Martin and Bobby Martin watched his father go forward. Overdyke, Percy. I wish they'd hurry, Mrs. Dunbar said to her oldest son. I wish they'd hurry. They're almost through, her son said. You get ready to run, tell Dad, Mrs. Dunbar said. Mr. Summers called his own name and then stepped forward precisely and selected a slip from the box. Then he called, Warner. 77th year I'd been in the lottery, old man Warner said as he went through the crowd. 77th time. Watson, the tall boy, came awkwardly through the crowd. Someone said, don't be nervous, Jack. And Mr. Summers said, take your time, son. Zanini, after that, okay, so Z is here. After that, there was a long pause, a breathless pause, until Mr. Summers, holding a slip of paper in the air, said, all right, fellows. Okay, so he also has one. Meaning, when they said nobody is, free from the lottery or excused from the lottery, they mean literally nobody. So, all right, fellows. For a minute, no one moved, and then all the slips of paper were open. Suddenly, all the women began to speak at once, saying, who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Dunbars? Is it the Watsons? Then the voices began to say, it's Hutchison. It's Bill. Bill Hutchison's got it. Go tell your father, Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. People began to look around to see the Hutchisons. Bill Hutchison was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, Tessie Hutchison shouted to Mr. Summers, you didn't give him time enough to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair. Be a good sport, Tessie, Mrs. Delcroix called, and Mrs. Graves said, all of us took the same chance. All of us meaning had the same chance, and you got it. Shut up, Tessie, Bill Hutchison said. So Hutchison and the Hutchison family have gotten it. Well, everyone, Mr. Summers said, that was done pretty fast, and now we've got to be hurrying a little more to get done in time. He consulted his next list. Bill, you draw for the family. You draw for the Hutchison family. You got any other households in the Hutchisons? Okay, so we have Dawn and Ava, which is Mrs. Hutchison yelled, make them take their chance. Daughters draw with their husband's family, Tessie, Mr. Summers said gently. You know that as well as anyone else. Meaning the daughters of Bill Hutchison, Dawn and Ava, I don't know if Dawn's a girl or boy, but they cannot draw on his behalf because they can draw only for their husband and the husband's family. It wasn't fair, Tessie said. Okay, so there's a lottery and Bill Hutchison isn't happy to have won. I guess not, Joe, Bill Hutchison said regretfully. My daughter draws with her husband's family. That's only fair. And I've got no other family except the kids. Then, as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you, Mr. Summers said in explanation. And as far as drawing for households is concerned, that's you too, right? Right, Bill Hutchison said. How many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill Hutchison said. There's Bill Jr. and Nancy and little Dave, Tessie, me. All right then, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you got the tickets back? Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. Put them in the box then, Mr. Summers directed. Take bills and put it in. Okay, so they're going to put some of these tickets back, like Bill Hutchison's tickets and I think his family's tickets. I think we ought to start over, Mr. Hutchison said as quietly as she could. I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that. Mr. Graves had selected the 5 slips and put them in the box, and he dropped all the papers but those onto the ground. So all the other papers, except for those 5, go back into the box. And the breeze takes all the littered papers of all the other kind of names and everything and lifts them off. Listen, everybody, Mrs. Hutchison was saying to the people around her. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked. Mr. Summers asked, and Bill Hutchison, with one quick glance around at his wife and children, nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers says, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave. Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy who came up willingly with him up to the box. Take a paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. So the child, Davy, put his hand into the box and laughed. Take just one paper, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it while little Dave stood next to him and looked up at him wonderingly, like he's not understanding. Nancy, next. Mr. Summers said, Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, nearly knocked the box over as he got a paper out. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a minute, looked around defiantly, and then set her lips and went up to the box. She snatched a paper out and held it behind her. Bill, Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchison reached into the box and felt around, wringing his hand out at last with a slip of paper in it. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, I hope it's not Nancy. And the sound of the whisper reached the edges of the crowd. It's not the way it used to be, old man Warner said clearly. People ain't the way they used to be. All right, Mr. Summers said, open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's. Mr. Graves opened the slip of paper, and there was a general sigh through the crowd as he held it up. And everyone could see that it was blank. So there are 3 children of Bill Hutchison. There's Bill Hutchison and there's Tessie. This is the family. So Mr. Graves opens one of the child's, Dave's paper, and it's blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs at the same time, and both beamed and laughed, turning around to the crowd, holding their slips of paper above their heads, and it's blank. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchison, and Bill unfolded his paper, showed it. It was blank. It's Tessie, Mrs. Summers said. Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. Show us her paper, Bill. Okay, no, show us her paper. Now, she's not showing the paper, so then he's like, Bill, can you show it to us? Can you take it from her? Bill Hutchison went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it. The black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with the heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchison held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. Okay, now the thing is that the first time round, Bill got it, and then kind of they do it again within Bill's family. And then Tessie gets it. Okay, all right, folks, let's finish quickly. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, okay, they had forgotten a lot of stuff, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Delcroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. Come on, hurry up. Mr. Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, gasping for breath, I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead and I'll catch up with you. The children had stones already, and someone gave little Davy Hutchison few pebbles, meaning the son of this mother. Tessie Hutchison was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It isn't fair, she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old man Warner was saying, come on, everyone. Old man Warner is saying, come on. He's like riling the crowd, exciting them, telling them do their job. Steve Adams was in the crowd, in the front of the crowd of villagers with Mrs. Graves right beside him. It isn't fair. It isn't right, Mrs. Hutchison screamed, and then they were upon her. So that is the story. That the lottery is that you can understand. You can understand what the lottery is. Okay, now
The lottery was to decrease the population.
Exactly. And that's why you need, you needed to do the lottery and get the corn. And then the young people, they are not wanting to do it. And you can just imagine what's going to happen. I want